Hi, everyone. I am really excited to be here with Dr. Nicholas Cole, who is the founder of the Quill project, which is at Oxford University's Pembroke College. And we're really excited to have him with us. He is just has a fascinating background on the American Constitution. And so we're going to have a lot of fun today talking about just the history of religious freedom in America, how the Constitution, constitutional provisions develop this freedom, and there's a lot of fascinating things to uncover here. So, Nicholas, thank you for being with us today.
No, it's an absolute pleasure.
It's great to be with you again. I know that we've had a kind of a rough road in America so recently, so we're this will be nice to kind of take us back a few centuries to the founding and reconsider our roots.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks. Well, so Nicholas, tell me first just a little bit about the Quill Project.
So the Quill Project studies how America has written its constitutional law. And we really take seriously the idea that America's constitutional texts have been negotiated and thought about very carefully in very sort of formal settings by different groups of people. I'm sure many of your listeners will have heard of the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. It took them 3 months, about 60 people, about 3 months to write the Constitution in 1787. And you might be asking, well, what were they doing for all of that time? And the Quill Project is really about exploring how they went about that work, showing you, morning by morning, afternoon by afternoon, what they were debating, its context, and how the words evolved through debate. You can think of it in a way as a kind of track changes on steroids for historians, and that's really what we try and do. So we have a much more precise understanding of where America's founding texts have come from, but also looking at later constitutional developments and also state level constitutional development. America's got 50 states, and between them they've had 235 different constitutions, and all of those have been written in constitutional conventions as well, and they've also been amended many hundreds, even thousands of times too. So there's a rich tapestry of documents related to Americans debating rights, not just at the founding moment, but across time. And so the Quill Project's really about exploring all of that and giving Americans much better access to their foundational documents and a better understanding of how those texts have evolved.
Well, I love what the Quill Project has done for the Constitution. You've digitally captured and then you've made searchable the entire constitutional process, so that if you're interested in any of the debates on the First Amendment or any other component, slavery or race, any of these issues, you can literally search the entire constitutional database and find those topics and explore them. And so how long did it take you to do that? Because that is an enormous undertaking.
So we've been running as a project for about 5 years now. And the part of that time's been spent developing the software that we use, and a lot of the time spent doing documentary editing. But the original convention work, in fact, took us about a year to get our initial draft online of that original constitutional convention in 1787, and then we've refined it since. In fact, we're in the process right now of doing an even more accurate revision of those records. The Bill of Rights material took us much longer than we thought. We had expected that process to be very simple to capture. The Bill of Rights debates in Congress didn't take much time. But what we found there was actually that there are very few really good collations of all of the documents related to the writing of the Bill of Rights. So we actually had to do an awful lot of work ourselves to collate documents again and check it. So a project that we had originally thought would take us about 3 months ended up taking us closer to 2 years to do just on the Bill of Rights material. So some projects are quicker than we expect, and some projects much slower, and that's often related to the nature of the record and how well they've been edited in previous collections and things
how
like
many
that.
how many states do you have that you've now documented in the United States as well?
So the complete one that we've done, just because of a partnership that we had with a university, and still have very close partnership with Utah Valley University, is actually Utah's constitutional convention in 1895. And that project again took us closer to 2 years. Again, we thought it would be a very simple process, but it turns out that state constitutional documents are very complicated, much more complicated than we'd expected. The negotiation process at state level was much more complicated than we expected. And again, it took us a very long time to really comprehensively collate all of the documents related to that. And we've since expanded that. We've got about 5 other state constitutional convention projects on the go at the moment, ranging from Massachusetts in 1780 through to Illinois' most recent convention at the end of the 1960s. So we're trying to cover the sort of historical range of constitution writing in America. Of course, the founding period is very important, but subsequent thinking is also very important, and we're trying to compare, as it were, the more historical and the more modern processes to see whether people's behavior at these conventions is similar or different. So that's a fascinating group of projects, and we'll have some of those additional conventions published later this year for people to explore.
Well, I think it's fascinating because what we're seeing now in America with just the recent election and the transition of power is how important state constitutions and state processes are. And so this federal system that we have is really coming to the forefront of how important how states legislators write their laws are in our country. And probably, I think we've seen it more this year than we've probably ever seen it in the past in our history. So I'm really excited about those projects and the processes. And I know that there's a huge difference in how states and the federal government were thinking about some of the issues we're going to talk about today. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts on that. One of the things that I find really interesting about your project is how important it is for the people that are going into the Quill project and looking at how these debates were formed and how the decisions were being made, is how diverse and often divisive viewpoints from racism and religious freedom, all these different issues, trade agreements, et cetera, federal versus the power of states versus the national government, how all of these different divisive issues, how people were eventually able to arrive at an agreement and make these landmark documents possible. I think that what you call these negotiated texts in the Quill project is really one of the best features that you bring that we've never seen really of that process. And at Hardwired, we work with people around the world who are going and struggling through these very similar processes in developing constitutional legal protections for basic rights. And we find that often the United Nations or international organizations or foreign governments will come in and say, well, just, it's so easy, just accept these laws. And they really undermine how difficult these processes are and how important and valuable that debate and dialogue is to getting a system of government that everybody really accepts and feels buy into. And so that is really what I think is one of the greatest features of what Quill has highlighted here. And so I'm really excited to talk about those divisive arguments and how they came at some of the freedoms that we have today. And in particular, the First Amendment freedom of speech, of expression, of religion, of conscience. So tell me, I guess first.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I think it's really reassuring to remember that even the Constitutional Convention had to go through a process of debate and negotiation and compromise and really think through how to do that. And I think part of the American story should be inspiring for people now. Writing a constitution, agreeing on fundamental rights is a really difficult thing. It doesn't take 3 months because it's easy. It takes 3 months because it's actually really difficult to find those compromises, and it takes time. And it's not as simple as just splitting the difference. Often when we talk about compromise now, we think in terms of, well, there's one position over here and one position over here, and the compromise is just splitting down the middle. And that's just not how the Constitutional Convention for America's federal system worked either. These were great minds, great political thinkers in many cases, but it took them 3 months to work through issues and find points of compromise and points where they would give way. I find that a very reassuring
Yeah.
story for the modern world, actually. And so that's why in the Quill platform, we try as little as possible to have pictures of white men in powdered wigs. If any of your listeners go to our platform, we've deliberately tried for a very modern feel, and that's partly to let the text speak, but it's also to make it a much more modern feeling process to explore, rather than making it feel historical and alien. And that's partly because, as you say, countries all around the world, um, and even still the US is wrestling with what compromise on a lot of issues
Yeah.
mean. And so I think it's helpful to remember that the founding generation in America are much closer to us than we sometimes imagine. And so that, that's something we've really thought about in our visual presentation as well.
Well, I think that you hit the nail on the head. So thank you.